Hi everyone, welcome to Building a Better Sefton. I'm Tim Short and this is...
And I'm David Moorhead, and it's raining because we are in Sefton, the northwest of England, and it's September, but hopefully the sun is on its way.
Yeah, we do like talking about the weather on this podcast, which I think is very relevant to everyone. We've got, speaking of the weather and the environment, we've got Neil Doolin on this show, and Neil is the councillor, the only Green councillor in Sefton, the Green Party, really big at the moment with the election of Zach Polanski as leader, who's a fantastic communicator. And Neil's come on to talk about Green politics nationally in terms of what the Green vision is, but also locally and the impact on the locality. Speaks really well. David, how did you think it went?
I thought it was really interesting because I don't know anything about the Green Party. And I've been raised by the media to think it's all about climate change, etc. And it doesn't really affect the day-to-day reality of family life. But Neil really clearly made the connection between poverty and the environment. And I think when we are seeing more food banks than there are McDonald's, when the reality is that 30% of children in Sefton schools are starving, you can see the connection. So I think he made the Green Party incredibly relevant, where people are dismissing the environment. You can see its huge impact on poverty. And I thought he himself was quite humble, but he's made huge achievements because he is the first Green councillor ever in Sefton, and he, in the heart of South Sefton, he actually has broken through that red wall and he's actually delivering for the people. So it was really quite an honour to meet him.
Yeah, he spoke really well, and he's the councillor for Seaforth and Waterloo, although I think it's being renamed next year because there's some changes to boundaries. He also spoke really well about the difficulty he's faced getting things through with the local Labour group who tend to vote as a body. He tells a really great story about his election, which people should listen to the night of his election.
Yeah.
And he also shares his analysis of the disrupted meeting up at Southport in, I think it was July. I think it was in July when people were shouting from the gallery and the meeting had to be abandoned, although it's being rearranged. But he gives a lot of very interesting insights into how things are done in Sefton Council. And he's a bit concerned about the lack of scrutiny in committees. He was a bit concerned about the budget. There wasn't enough detail to the most recent budget. So he does raise a lot of issues, both locally, but also, as you said, the national picture. Speaks about Rimrose Valley as well, which is now not going to be used for the huge road between Switch Island and the port of Liverpool. And we talk about some of the national issues as well. But it was really great to have Neil on. I think it'd be interesting if there were a few more Green councillors in Sefton, because I think once you've got 4, you get a little bit more privilege in terms of scrutiny and involvement in day-to-day council run.
It was very inspiring. Sorry, I just introduced Willow, the dog. Okay.
Hi, Willow.
Could really see the Green Party emerging and being a force to be reckoned with. I was quite pleased. And also, you've got the fact that he didn't get elected the first time. He hasn't got a family who are already in politics, who give him a seat, etc. He is an outsider with a refreshing, different look. And it took him several attempts to actually convince people and convince the voters. And I think that's an inspiration for us all, that you don't need nepotism, right? And even if you don't succeed the first time, keep going, because if your message is true, it's of value. So don't give up.
Yeah. And I think one of the things as well, there's been a lot of pushback against Green politics recently from the populist right. And I know that, like, apparently renewable energy is now much cheaper than fossil fuels, but there's less profit involved. And we're getting a lot of kickback from vested interests, making contributions to certain parties and pushing back. So this is a really relevant issue, not just in terms of environmental justice, but social justice and social justice in Sefton as well. But just on that note, in terms of building and community, just want to reach out to our listeners. If you want to get involved in building a better Sefton, we're looking for a reporter to actually be able to pay people. So if you are interested, please get in touch. Please join our Facebook group, our YouTube channel. If you're listening to this through another channel or you've just chanced upon it, if you can please subscribe to Building a Better Sefton channel on YouTube. It just helps us get our message out there. We're doing a lot of shorts as well to get our message out there. We're also looking to go on Instagram soon, and we might get a new person to help us with that. We're also on Blue Sky. All information is in the notes. And subscriptions really do help on Substack as well. If you're on Substack, you can subscribe through there and get our podcast through Substack. The link will probably be to the YouTube channel. The most important thing we're asking people, well, not the most important thing, because the most important thing is what we're doing. We would like to make this sustainable, and we would like this to keep going into the future, to develop a news aspect as well as an interview aspect. And we are asking for people to make contributions through coffee.com, maybe through Substack by subscribing there, and also through our crowdfunder, which is all in the notes, because we really do want to make Sefton a better place to live. David, anything else you want to add?
No, just hopefully you enjoy listening and it makes you think, because I think if you start thinking, that gives you hope and for change. I think we are living in quite difficult, dark times, and I think really we have the talent and the ability in Sefton to bring in light. So hopefully these podcasts will inspire us to live in a better Sefton.
Without any further ado, let's get to our interview with Neil Doolin. And we want you to enjoy talking about community issues as well. There's a lot of toxicity out there. So let's work together and let's see how we can do this. Cheers, folks.
All right. Bye.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Building a Better Sefton. I'm Tim Short, and that is David Moorhead. David, how are you?
I'm very good. Even though the sun has gone in, I'm still having a good summer.
It's been quite good this summer so far. Right, now we've got Neil Doolin on today, and we've been trying to get hold of Neil for a while. Neil, thank you for giving up your precious time. You are a councillor representing the Green Party for Waterloo and Seaforth. It's in that correct order, isn't it, that ward? Is that correct?
Yeah, well, yeah, it is. I mean, its official name will be Church Ward. Right. But obviously, there's all-out elections next year and there's boundary changes. So Church Ward will have a new name next year and it'll be called Waterloo Ward.
I love all these. Hopefully it's not the kind of gerrymandering that we're currently seeing in the home of democracy in Texas, but I'm sure it'll all work out.
I'm sure hopefully it won't be your Waterloo either.
Exactly. Imagine that. I'm hoping it's Labour's Waterloo, actually.
Well, we're going to get to that. So, Neil, thanks for coming on. South Sefton generally is considered like a Labour stronghold for a number of years, and you were elected a few years ago. It was quite a big thing, really, for a Green councillor to win. I voted Green in the past just to declare I am in the Green Party. So I'm just getting out that. So, Neil, if I go easy on you, at least the audience will know why I'm going easy on you.
What do you hope to achieve for Sefton in your current position as a Green councillor? And how are you going to do this?
If we just go back in time a bit, so obviously I've become the first Green Party councillor in Sefton. There's been a Green Party in Sefton between 10 and 15 years. It's been active. It's kind of taken us a while to get to where we are now. The thing is that what I always learned from being in the Green Party, and I only joined the Green Party perhaps back in 2019, and I was never involved in any other party throughout my life. Always involved in campaign stuff. But then as I got older, I've been working in the NHS for nearly 30 years. And I started to think about, well, how do I make a difference now? And I found that it was the Green Party was a natural home for someone like me, who was kind of never really enamored with the traditional parties such as Labour, Lib Dems and Tories, etc. You know, obviously in general elections, I had to vote for someone. So I always voted, but just in terms of being active, it was certainly the Green Party for me. So in Sefton, when I joined back in 2019, we had no councillors. The thing is that we had loads of great people within the party who are very active in other things. But I suppose what we kind of realised within the last 3 or 4 years is that that's good, you know, being active within your community, you know, supporting your allotments, supporting the beach cleans, you know, working in a food bank is great stuff. But what we realised, and what Greens across the country have realised over the last sort of 10, 15 years as well, is that we need to be where the decisions are made. And that's what became really important for us in Sefton. There's no point in us being stuck on the outside and looking inwards and looking for others and trying to influence other parties to make the decisions that need to be made for Sefton. And we started to make a plan around, well, how do we get our first councillor? That plan became focused upon the Waterloo area because that was our strongest votes. Mike Carter stood in Waterloo for several years, and his background was working in the Rimrose Valley campaign to stop the road, etc., etc. And Mike was always coming second to the Labour candidate without having to do much work at all, you know. So he would get around 500 votes. Labour would get 1,800 votes, but he was always ahead of Lib Dems and Tories and anyone else that stood. And that was because of his activism and his work within the community. That we targeted then Waterloo, and then I became the candidate. And we kind of learned more about how to win kind of campaigns. We worked more kind of closely with the National Party around that. And in the end, you know, from 2022 to 23 and 24, when I finally won the seat, we ran a Target to Win campaign, and I was very active locally from 2022 onwards, putting out regular newsletters, highlighting issues, and finding that basically a lot of people were just very unhappy about how things were locally, and very unhappy about how things were kind of nationally. You know, there's a whole other story around how I got elected and what happened on election night, and I may bring that in if I get the chance in a bit. But just in terms of an impact, it was always said that, you know, if you put a Green in the room, things will change. And since I've been in the council chamber since May last year, I've actually noticed that, you know, there has been a change in the local Labour Party, probably not for the right reasons, you know, probably more to do with the fact that finally in South Sefton, where they've absolutely dominated for years and years, like within the Bootle constituency alone, 8 electoral wards. And until I was elected, you know, out of those 24 councillors, every single one was Labour. And then finally, I got my foot in the door. So 23 out of 24 councillors within Bootle constituency were Labour. So I'm one. But that had a massive impact upon the local Labour Party, you know, because in the end, the person I beat in Waterloo last year was a senior figure within the party, years of dedication working within the local Labour Party. He was a cabinet member, etc., etc. 1,405 people voted for me, and I won by 100 votes, beating the Labour Party candidate who had been a councillor in that area for 18 years. So what I've noticed is, in terms of impact, is that Labour do take notice of that now. They're looking over their shoulder. They don't want to lose any more seats, and they will do their best to work locally to try and reduce the risk of that happening in the future. I'm very proud of the impact that I've had. I've brought several motions to the council chamber that have had big impacts and have shown the local Labour Party for what it is. And that local Labour Party, since the general election last year, has been a firm supporter of Starmer's Labour Party. Absolutely firm supporter. So when I got elected, within a few months, we had a couple of motions going to the council chamber around asking the government to go back on its plan to cut the winter fuel allowance. And in both cases, I voted for those motions. And in both cases, the local Labour Party, voted against those motions and voted those motions down. I myself brought a motion to the council chamber to support the women who were affected by the changes in pensions over the year, the WASPI women. Now, I brought it there. And again, the local Labour group, the local Labour leadership within that group made sure that motion did not win, even though several years earlier, Labour, the local Labour in Sefton actually brought the same motion to council meeting. And got it through. So there are things like that where one green in the room, I found, can make a difference. It keeps Labour on its toes, especially in South Sefton.
I was going to say, thanks so much for that. And talking of the WASPI women, these are the women who were told they could retire at 60, and then the government moved the goalposts and they had to retire years later. And many women lost out in their divorce settlement. They suddenly had no money at 60 and had to wait several more years for a pension, or women gave up their careers, etc. And they do reckon in each constituency throughout the country, the number of WASPI women could actually make every constituency a swing vote.
Exactly.
Because there may be 5,000 women in the Bootle constituency that if they vote for parties that will still support their campaign. And the really sad thing with the WASPI women was that they weren't informed, because a government official said, well, women don't read letters, do they? So offensive. So can I just say, although it was defeated, well done for standing up for the women in the borough who now in their late 60s, early 70s are struggling because they have been denied justice. So thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I can't emphasise this in much how loyal Sefton Labour group leadership have been to Starmer's Labour Party. Other local Labour groups around the country had no issues in terms of condemning the winter fuel allowance, supporting WASPI women, etc., etc. But for whatever reason, this local Sefton Labour leadership have supported Starmer to the hilt, to the absolute hilt. And even when this year, when there was a motion brought forward by Sean Halsall in terms of PIP and the changes to PIP, they defeated the motion, they brought in their own motion, toned it down. We will write to our Labour MPs expressing our dissatisfaction, not condemning the government, but just asking local MPs to pass on, that we're not really happy with this. Anything you kind of put through will either get defeated or Labour will put in an amendment to kind of change motions. And the final example of that, and the Labour group leadership were fuming about this. I think it was last September, October. We just had the general election. Rimrose Valley was still under threat in terms of the proposed road, the dual carriageway, still under threat. And I brought a very simple motion through to the council meeting in September, October, simply saying there's a new government, this motion reaffirms the council's a commitment to ensuring that, the road shouldn't be built, blah, de, blah, de, blah. Didn't mention any other party, just a simple motion, very similar to what had been passed in the previous several years in terms of supporting the Rimrose Valley campaign to stop the road. But Labour, I have to say this, they tore me to shreds during that meeting. They were very uncivil. They had a plan put in place where 5 or 6 of them spoke out against the motion. And in the end, what they done was they amended my motion. And what did they do? The amended motion was like backslapping local Labour MPs and local Labour councillors for the work that they done in trying to end the road. And that, again, the council would write to the Labour MPs who were, asking them to bring this issue up with the new Labour government.
It's very frustrating, though, that kind of working against a body that's very disciplined, but also singing from the same hymn sheet as the national government, when they know that there's often quite a bit of political capital in saying, we will say that we disagree with that because that's what people are feeling, kind of on the doorsteps. Now, you've explained Rimrose Valley. The ongoing issue there about getting traffic to and from the port is something that we're going to look at in other episodes as well. Within the Green Party at the moment, actually, there's a leadership election between Jack Polanski, who's considered the kind of new popular figure on the left of the Green Party, if you like, and then you've got some traditional candidates who are standing against. So we've got that going on, but Jack's been in the media a lot in recent months, and it's the first time really, although the previous Green leader was in a lot as the only Green MP in the country, there are now several Green MPs, and many people think, the Greens, they're just to do it preserving the environment against climate change. But what do you think the organisation does for people who are unsure? Because there's quite a lot of pushback against net zero and green issues we're hearing now from certain vested interests. So how would you sum up what the Green Party is all about?
I think, when I'm speaking to residents on the doorsteps and I'm out and about and I'm up and down South Road and St. John's Road a lot, and I bump into people and people ask me questions around this, what I always attempt to do is to link what's happening to the climate and the climate emergency, and the need to move away from fossil fuels, to reduce carbonisation, blah, de, blah, de, blah. And I link that to things around poverty, because that is what's happening. We've seen that in recent years in terms of the surge of electricity and gas prices, and that was because this country, along with several other countries, had an over-reliance on fossil fuels to provide energy, whereas for the last 20 years, we should have been moving away and moving to wind and water, electricity, blah, de, blah, de, blah. So I always try and link that and make it real for local people that the Green Party, we do, as I say, we do bang on about that, okay? But that's because it's really important, because, the world's on fire. It's as simple as that. We see that now. The world is actually on fire, and it's not going to get better. Just before I went on this, I was looking at the news and ITV News. The actual carrot harvest for this year has basically failed. It's failed, So there's going to have to be need to import tons of carrots into the country, and prices are rising. The price of a cauliflower has actually risen. It's doubled in price. So food prices in the end are being affected by climate change. It's as simple as that. So I link on the doorstep, that to poverty and to rising prices of electricity and food, because that's what the real link is. And I think what I do as well, Tim and David, is, I think a lot of people think of the Green Party that somehow like you have to have a master's degree to be in the Green Party and to be a Green Party politician. And I say to people, no, you don't. No one's expecting you to know the ins and outs of climate change, what's happening in the Arctic and the Antarctic and sea levels. No, you don't need to have that level of understanding around it. Just understand things the way I understand things. Very simply, the changing climate is affecting poor people more harshly, with food prices, electricity prices and gas prices, etc., etc. So that's what I try and do, Tim. That's how I just make it kind of real for people, that the Green Party, as I say, we bang on about this and we bang on about climate change, but only because we're all experiencing it now. Every day of our lives, it's impacting upon us.
No, thank you for that, because that was so clearly explained. I can see why you got elected now, knocking on the door. Because I am very unfamiliar with the Green Party, but that was really good. Just moving on, the Bootle Strand is obviously a huge feature in Sefton. What are your views on the current development of the Strand?
I stood in the general election last year for the Green Party within Bootle constituency, and I think I was interviewed a couple of times around this subject, and people asked me about this. Yeah, the simple fact is Sefton Council overpaid for the property on the land, didn't they? They paid something like 32 million or whatever it is, and they overpaid for it. And now that site now, I think it was quoted a couple of years ago, like it's worth 14 million or something like that, So, looking hindsight is a very bad investment.
Sorry, did you say 14 million?
14 million, yeah.
And they paid 32 million.
32 million.
Wow. So that's 18 million taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So they overpaid for it. And now what's done, it's done. But my view is that the people of Bootle deserve nice spaces. They deserve a nice environment. They deserve a shopping area that is actually thriving. So in that sense, in terms of the new investment and the 20 million that is coming in, just to say that the 20 million pound was agreed by the Tory government, actually. So with that money, came from the Tory government. So that's going to go in to the new Strand and all of those changes that are going to happen locally. So I am supportive of that because the people of Bootle deserve this, So on the one hand, things went badly wrong for Sefton and they got a large loan to pay for this, which they're going to pay for a long, long time. But I welcome investment like this because for decades, Bootle, there's been underinvestment, hasn't there? You can see it anytime I get the bus into town. You can see it on the bus journey from Waterloo all the way through to Kirkdale. You can see that. So I do welcome it, and I welcome any investment like that. And I'll support the council. I will support the Labour group and anything that they want me to support around that. I don't know what was happening. I wasn't around at that time when those original decisions were made.
There's just been a recent Ofsted into children's services. Now, this is something that me and David are going to come back to in a bit more detail. And it was unsatisfactory for a number of years. It's just got a good.
But that's the Sefton PR. All the children's services met with outside their headquarters with a big banner saying good, but actually it was only good for social care. For SEND and education, they're still inadequate. And when you read that report, there are 5 areas. They get good in 4, which is great because they were inadequate since 2016. But the one that requires improvement is actually children in care who need help, safeguarding, keeping them alive. And it says disabled children are not listened to. Now, if I was in charge, I don't think I would have stood outside my workplace with a huge banner saying good?
Well, I was just going to ask Neil's opinion on that, because although they have received a good overall, as they say, in certain things, there's also things which are still a big problem. Now, this has been in the media spotlight for a number of years, but the glee that I've seen from some of the people in the council group about this, it didn't sit right with me, as if, oh yeah, we've got a good, aren't we amazing? Instead of saying, right, okay, what's gone wrong? What can we do to keep making things better and moving in the right direction? Like, we've improved here and we're going to focus on that. I've been a bit concerned if you had any observations about the situation with children's service.
It is a hard one. So I've worked in the NHS, as I've said, God, I started in 1994. So that's just over 30 years now, isn't it? It is, yeah. So over the years, I've always, and I still work very closely with social care staff in Sefton. And the services that I work in terms of mental health services, we work very closely with children's services and children's social workers. It's taken Sefton a long time to see the improvements. What I've seen as a councillor is that Sefton have had to make investments in terms of staffing, more kind of leadership posts, and really kind of pushing through improvements. You know, just in terms of nationally children's services struggle to recruit staff, and it's happened with Sefton. It has, because basically, you know, I mean, you're at the sharp end of things. You're working with families who are often desperate, and it's hard work. And it's probably even harder if you're working within a local authority where CQC come in and they say, well, basically, it's just not good enough. And then morale dips, etc., etc. So I totally understand that. I am glad that there are some improvements, Tim, and certainly, David, what you actually mentioned, because within any CQC report, there's always good and a bad bits. There's always things that are never as good as what you would want them to be, but you can get an overall kind of feeling and score around the whole thing. I've spoken to families this year on a Teams meeting and who are telling me their experiences of working with Sefton because their children are kind of service users and have SEND needs. And some of the stories are very hard to hear, because it's been very challenging for those families, as it is across Sefton, to obtain the help and support that they've needed and which legislation states they should have. So I totally support those families in those situations. They shouldn't have to struggle. They shouldn't have to go through the huge appeal process just to get some basic support around their children and kind of keeping them within normal schooling, etc.
So I think just in summary then to what you said, obviously, Neil, you've heard some very troubling things from some of the families. David, you've heard and experienced and witnessed, you know, over the last few years, huge issues with children's services. And although there have been some improvements, there's still a long way to go. Yeah. And this idea that this is a cause for this mass celebration is really, really missing the point, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it hurt in one sense that I'm not sure about this figure, that it's only 10% of the borough is the social care. So 90% of children and their issues aren't part of this Ofsted. But what really hurt a lot of parents was seeing the staff in wine bars all drinking, shouting, aren't we fab? Where these parents can't get respite. You know, they're struggling, their children are in danger, etc. And the wine bar posts were very, very offensive.
Yeah, but that's that disconnect, though, which I think in all politics and in all roles, you get used to the role. I get that to a degree, but the problem isn't, from my perspective, the problem is there's a lot of people who think that their seats are safe no matter what. There's a lot of allegations that in South Sefton, it's like family name and all that helps you to get into certain positions. And it just doesn't look good. And then they don't help themselves, but that's the arrogance of it, isn't it? Sometimes that arrogance, it's like show some humility and reach out to people and just say, we're happy with this improvement, we want to improve further. I don't know, it really doesn't sit well with me at all.
No. And then I was going to say, Neil, what are your views on Southport, the regeneration of it? Because it has been struggling, and then now there are new developments. How do you feel Southport is coming along?
I mean, again, it's very similar to the Bootle experience, isn't it? I don't have much to do with the Southport end because I'm a South Sefton councillor, but obviously I get to hear things, and I get to hear things from the Green Party members who actually live up in Southport. I understand that it's been very frustrating for our local people in Southport for several years. You know, they perceived, and I think quite rightly most of the time, that their town was declining. It's as simple as that, wasn't it? Now, of course, again, there is new investment into Southport and there are new projects. And even the pier may be saved. Although we don't, again, you know, anytime you hear the pier is going to be saved, you just wait for the next bit to say when, and then nothing happens, you know, except, we've got some, and then so nothing happens. So it's very similar for me to what's happened in Bootle. I'm, you know, happy for as much investment as we can do to within the Southport area. I understand that local people are often frustrated. I know there's a culture issue between North Sefton and South Sefton. I think that is still the case. I think that is probably part of the issue as well, in terms of what has happened is that you've had a Labour cabinet within Sefton Council that, you know, mostly comes from South Sefton councillors. So do they really have a good understanding of what's happening in North Sefton? And those are the questions you have to ask. But again, I'd say, David, as well, is that, happy for more investment, happy to see Southport, a town that should be thriving. If you follow Facebook groups, you kind of get the feeling that things have been on decline for years. And
I was going to say, what do you think is the biggest change that needs to happen in Sefton?
I think what the borough is facing at the moment is that over the next 3 years, the council will be faced with about £45 million shortfall to run services the way it is at the moment. What needs to change, and what needs to change with this new Labour government, is that they need to kind of step up. They need to fund the council the way that it should be funded. And I do understand that over a decade of Tory rule, you know, most councils in England and Wales experienced reduction in budgets, and that affected frontline services, etc. But let's get back to the fact, last year we were all told you must vote Labour. You know, you must vote Labour and things will improve. So this is the opportunity now, you know, for this Labour government to invest in local authorities the way that they said they would. And over the next 3 years, it's going to be crucial for Sefton that they do. Because if they don't, there's a real risk to frontline services. Staff redundancies, staff reductions may well happen. And all of these regeneration projects that are actually planned north and south, some of them will have to be stalled or even stopped if Sefton doesn't get the investment that it needs just to manage services the way they are. So it's a crucial period.
Oh, sorry, I'm just trying to take that in, because often you feel we're at rock bottom, but actually it could get worse without the correct funding, as you say, that should be delivered from central government.
Yeah,
I think
there was huge cuts, wasn't there, in 2010, and also that came in the years after that, because there was a delay that has really put frontline services under pressure. Things like social care, and again, the Labour government nationally have said, "Oh, we're going to look into that in another parliament." It's kind of the can's being kicked down the road with social care, but
Yeah.
huge issues. And we've seen some councils up and down the country declare bankruptcy, also do some risky investments to try and balance the books, which have then backfired. And the 45 million potential shortfall over 3 years, that is a huge concern. Council taxes go up. There's less money to be generated from certain sources that the council used to generate money from, and then the central government funding. It is a really big issue, isn't it?
It is a big issue. And this year, so we had the council budget meeting in March of this year. So it was the first time I was able to look at the budget for 24-25. And I voted against the Labour budget. And and some people, well, why did you vote against it? Well, one of the things that I didn't like is that, again, it was the full, nearly 5% a council tax rise to plug the gaps again. And another thing I didn't like is when we were sitting in council chamber, when we received the papers, and I have to say, John Pugh, the Lib Dem leader, pointed this out immediately. We received the budget papers, like 10 pages of it, or 15 pages. And it just had, big numbers, but no bloody detail, So we just got the papers before the meeting, and then you're looking and thinking, well, what does this mean? Where are the cuts? Where's the investment? It was hard to look through it and to think, well, this doesn't mean anything. And what was pointed out in the council meeting was that years previously, before the budget, you would get a wad load of paper that would give you that detail about which department is going to get X amount of money, which department will get less money. But we were expected to vote in a Labour budget where we didn't know what the bloody hell we were voting for. Whether you were voting for cuts or voting for investment, it was hard to understand the whole thing. So it was ridiculous. But of course, what this goes back to is Labour have a huge majority, 51 seats in the council now out of 66. They don't need to tell us anything.
No, because also we are trying to get Labour on here and ask them the same question, and we just get silent.
Yeah, I know. And then what happened after that, right? So Labour put out a newsletter in Waterloo. They put it out within a few weeks, and it was about, the headline was something like, Labour put in place a progressive budget, big headlines. And then the Greens, a column on the right, the Greens voted against this, the Greens voted against that. They never mentioned me by name, just saying the Greens voted against this. Because I voted against the budget, what they were trying to tell people is that I voted against everything, which I didn't, but I just couldn't vote for a budget that hurts working people again by another 5% increase in council tax. And what people tell me now after the budget, well, we haven't seen any of this investment locally. South Road is still the same, and St. John's Road is still the same, still litter everywhere, bloody, but where is this investment? So that was an interesting period for my first budget.
What are you most proud of in Sefton and why?
I think personally myself, I'm very proud that I was the first Green Party councillor. And I know going forward, I won't be the only Green Party councillor going forward in the future. We had to start somewhere, and we done the work, we done the hard work. We got a councillor elected, and then we move on and look to get more councillors elected for 2026. So for me personally, I'm very proud of that. I have to say this though, and some of the frustrations I was around is that I do have an impact in the council chamber. So anything that comes on the agenda, I can stand up and ask questions, any of the standard items, and you can see the Labour leadership in the council chamber at times. They don't like it, because certainly for anything in South Sefton and issues in South Sefton, they didn't have to answer to anyone. But now they have me there who can stand up and say, well, what about this and what about that? So that's frustrating in the sense of people ask me after I was elected, well, what committee did you get put on? And I says, I didn't get put on any committee. And they were saying, why not? Because I was excluded. like Sean Halsall was, because to be on a committee or any type of committee, you know, within the council, a scrutiny committee, blah, 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 we have to be part of a group, a political group. And to form a political group, you've got to have 4 councillors. So that's why we feel frustrated. We're sat outside a bit still. You know, we're not able to ask the questions in terms of scrutiny committees for children's services, etc., where we can have a bigger impact. But I'm hoping in the future that will actually change, you know. And again, I know this has been said big. I listened to Bobby's interview as well around this, and I think he mentioned this, where every committee has a Labour chair and a deputy chair, even the scrutiny committee, you know. So basically, it's like Labour marking its own homework.
Or at times,
and when I tell people this, they can't believe it. And you think, wouldn't you think, so as not to be labelled, that they would just say, oh, let's just invite one of the Lib Dems to be a deputy, or even Neil Doolin, he'll be a pain. And he'll put it all over social media. But at least we can't be accused of just being a clothes shop and marking our own homework.
It is shocking, because you have the chair and the scrutiny committee's just changed, and Chloe Parker is now the chair, and she was actually in June asking questions and being quite critical. Leo Evans, who is the Liberal Dem from Southport, he has asked question after question for years, right? But he's not the deputy. So he like sits, and other people now are asking, right, which is good. But for years it's been Leo, and I think he would have made a superb vice chair. But you're quite right, they're marking their homework, or I don't even think they're marking it.
Exactly.
Just saying,
Yeah, but what I will say is, I've made criticisms of Labour and Sefton during this interview, but you know, it's been against their leadership, and I know that there are very good Labour councillors within that group, very good Labour councillors, and if you speak to them on a one-to-one basis, they're unhappy with Starmer. They were unhappy having to vote against the motions for the winter fuel allowance, blah, 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 but there's a whipping system, and they vote every time, you know, as to what they get told. And that's something to mention.
I would agree. Cause
maybe Jim Connolty,
yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
You know, as a Labour councillor on the scrutiny committee, he was new. He was giving loads of critical questions and a supplementary one as well. So I do agree, some very good councillors from Labour, you know. We always ask this just to prove that we're not all living in our own bubble. What do you think the main criticisms that you face and the Green Party face?
I think the main criticisms in Sefton is that it's a hard one, because it's about me, but then it's around the party, isn't it? I suppose the main criticisms for me, and it's just personal, okay? Because in the end, I'm a councillor, but I do have a personal life, and I do have a professional life. I work in the NHS. So sometimes it's definitely spinning plates. And sometimes, you know, I've really got to be on the emails, because most of my contact with local residents and other kind of groups and organizations will come through on emails. And because I'm very high profile on social media, I get messages, then I get WhatsApps, you know, and then if I put something on a face group, then I get responses there, and sometimes I miss things, and sometimes I get a response like, you haven't responded to my email from 2 weeks ago. So that is a criticism of me. But again, what I would go back to is, I'm a sole Green Party councillor, and sometimes people outside of Church Ward and Waterloo are asking me to do things, and I wish I could do more. I've had loads of contact from other residents groups in South Sefton, you know, especially in relation to the Church Road issue. to air pollution in South Sefton, and I've done my best to try and do things, but in the end I'm a sole Green Party councillor. But what I will say is that when there's more of us, we will do better. We will definitely do better. And in terms of having a bigger impact, getting on the committees, putting in more work locally to local communities. Because one of the things was, in terms of getting elected, what I was picking up all the time was that they, and it's a common thing, they felt ignored. Local people just felt ignored by the local Labour Party, and it didn't matter who you voted in. They always got in, and then some local councillors didn't have to do much after that. But what I will tell this story, because I should have brought it in on the last question, is there was a funny thing happened on election night. So this was my third time trying to get elected. So in 2022, I got 30% of the vote. We got the vote from 21% to 30% in 2022. The next year, we got the vote up to 40%. And then last year, then I won the seat with just over 50%. I remember on election night, so Bootle constituency has its own room within Aintree. So there's 8 tables and everyone there is Labour except me and our little group of Green Party supporters. So as the night went on, all of the other tables were declaring, and of course it's a Labour majority, 1,800, blah, 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 blah. They were winning everywhere, as they always do in South Sefton. And it was becoming apparent that something different was happening on the church ward table this year. And so we had, lots of the local Labour leadership were around the church ward count, around the tables where all the votes being counted. And even the local MP, Peter Dowd, was there for most of the night. So we had them all around us. It was me, Stephen, Kieran and Sam. There was only 4 of us and loads of them. And then we were looking at the bundles. And then I was saying to Stephen in our part, God, it's looking very close this year, isn't it? And he says, yeah, I think you're ahead. And this was like 11:30. And I was thinking, really? He says, yeah. And then I couldn't believe it. And then within the next half hour then, we got told first, before they announced it, you get told first in a little group. The returning officer comes up and says, these are the votes, these are the results. So Labour then, they asked for a count of the bundles. So they're all in bundles of 100. And I says, fair enough. If you want to count the bundles, make sure there's no Labour bundle there stuck in a green. So in the end, it came back, I won by 105 votes. When that got announced, just before it got announced that I won, every Labour Party member in that room, including the MP, scattered, left the room. No one came over to say, oh, well done, Neil. Fair enough, Neil. You done all right. Yeah. What you would expect to happen, but they absolutely scattered, left the room. They were fuming, absolutely fuming about what had just happened.
I don't know what to say about that. I mean, that's just, they know they're already going to be in a big majority. And then just to say, oh, well done, congratulations, look forward to working with you in the public interest. No?
Because I always feel, and I attended the January meeting of the full council, and I'm a retired teacher, that I expected my year 7 class to be well behaved and kind and a good sport. And that night, if it had been children, they would have congratulated each other and accepted it. And at the council meeting, there wouldn't have been uneducated shouting down or whatever. And I think councillors have to be role models. If we can expect it from year 7 children, then the councillors should be better. So it's really sad that you had to endure that. But what a victory.
Yeah, it was. I mean, yeah, it was. And it made a national, it was on the BBC website as well, because it was a breakthrough for the Green Party in Sefton. And in fact, that was probably the headline from the Sefton elections that year, Yeah.
And
it sent shockwaves through South Sefton.
Wow. Yeah.
Shockwaves. Well done. Just very quickly, Neil, were you present at that meeting that had to finish early because of disruption from the public?
Yeah,
a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
What was your spin on whether it needed to be stopped and what happened that night? Just very briefly. And again, you feel free to say as much or as little as you want about this.
So it's not the first time that this has happened. In some of the previous meetings, we have had groups and individuals who have attended where they've put in kind of questions to the council, which they can do, and they can speak to those questions then within the chamber. And some of these individuals and groups had done that before the last meeting. And I think in the past, there was the odd person who kind of lost their head and was shouting and roaring, but they were asked to leave and then they left. I suppose I was very surprised that they were allowed to stay this time. I was very surprised about that. I think the meeting was stopped once. It was paused once so that some order could be established. And then it was resumed within 15 or 20 minutes. And then it just ended up in farce again because you had lots of people who were in the public gallery shouting at the Labour group and shouting towards the mayor, etc., etc. I do think it could have been managed better, and I probably, I haven't heard the detail of how it's going to be managed in the future, but I suspect that it will be managed better. But what I will say is that some of these groups, they have very odd views, and a couple of times in recent months I've been stopped outside going into the council chamber outside Bootle Town Hall, and I've been asked questions around vaccines, around chemtrails and around 5G, and I've just gave them honest answers. If there's science behind any of that, I'm happy to hear the science and agree with it. That's the person I am. It's as simple as that. But I think what probably should happen, and I'm hoping it's happened since, I think the council officers should engage with those people in the meantime, explain around systems and processes and how all these meetings work, as a way of trying to ensure that it doesn't get repeated again.
Did the police turn up?
They did after the event, after it was cancelled.
Right, because interestingly, in June at the Scrutiny Committee meeting for Children's Services, myself and some other parents decided to attend, and we were all waiting outside Bootle Town Hall, and someone had called the police on us, and the police turned up and interrogated us. And I thought, what a waste of taxpayers' money, because it was very clear we weren't at this big demo, we weren't a threat or anything. And they said, we got an email. I'm led to believe Sefton called the police on send parents. But nobody thought of a full council meeting and the police until after the event, where they probably may have been needed.
I don't know if you've seen the video footage. Some guy who I think is sympathetic to some of these groups. And by the way, there may be some very good issues in amongst it all, but there was loads of 5G stuff going on. But it did get well out of hand. And I thought the meeting probably did need to be stopped and maybe the gallery cleared. There's been issues since then that they hadn't had another meeting arranged where maybe the public aren't there to get through a lot of important stuff. And there's been a lot of the Lib Dems and the Labour group have been having a go at each other. The leader of the Conservative group's been saying, come on, this isn't good, we need to have our meetings. So it has caused a problem. But as you say, David, it looks like there's been overreactions in certain places, and then this hasn't been dealt with as effectively as it might have done.
So it's just to say I have an update about that. So we got an email from the council today to say that they've convened an extraordinary meeting of council for the 4th of September.
4th of September.
So we have our normal council meeting on the 11th, the week after. So they've put in an extraordinary meeting to deal with the business that was stopped that night. Now, I know that the Labour leadership actually didn't want that. They thought that everything could wait until the 11th. But from the way that I'm reading the email, it sounds like the council officers themselves have actually arranged a meeting.
Yeah, I think there's been a bit of public pressure for that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Cool. And is that in Southport or Bootle?
I think the one on the 4th of September is in Bootle, and then the one on the 11th then is in Southport. So you're working for your councillor allowance now. You have to go to two council meetings within 2 weeks. They're getting their money's worth.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Listen, Neil, you've been with us for over an hour. David, is there anything else that you want to ask? Or?
No, can I just say, not knowing much about the Greens, I have been educated, and thank you so much for taking the time to come on and explain your views. It's been, it's given me a lot to think about. So thank you.
Cheers. It's no problem at all, and thanks very much for having me.
Well, thank you very much for giving up
Carry
your time.
on.